Hey, welcome to Next Level Method Podcast. I'm Richard Ryerson.
And I'm Matt Lilly.
And we're here to help you take your life to the next level. Let's get started. Well, Patrick Sweeney on the show. This was, you'd still, I'm speaking about a month ago at YPO. I really enjoyed him. Fear is Fuel is his book.
Yeah.
He grew up terrified of everything.
Right.
And witnessed this plane crash when he was a kid.
Right.
Obviously, fear of flying.
Yeah.
And then got leukemia in his 30s. So I won't give away all the listen to the show. I mean, he's got an amazing story.
Yes.
But what's great about it is what we've talked about on the show, that the fear and uncertainty never goes away. We've talked about that on previous episodes. But there's always something good on the other side of it, right? There's something of significance if you can work through it. That was my big takeaway for the show. What did you think?
Yeah, I think listeners will really just enjoy. He's a great storyteller, has great stories to tell, had a very colorful life, still having a colorful life. He's by no means done with having a colorful life, as you can tell. And just, when we were talking to him, he was in France at a house he owns there in France. And so we had some internet challenges there back and forth, but it's just quite an interesting guy and just one of those guys you could just talk to for hours and hours. Want to go to dinner, have a beer, whatever. But he's just a great guy, and just I think to your point, that resilience of he handled fear maybe a little differently than I have in the past or other people have in the past, but he's used it as a tremendous fuel to fuel his life versus becoming a kind of less than. He's become more than because of fear, and he shared that. And I love the fact in his book, Fear is Fuel, that he actually interviewed all these neuroscientists and literally got down to the science of what's happening and then what you can do about it, which is you can change your mind. So,
well, and that was my big takeaway that I really learned, because I love talking about this stuff. You've heard me talk about this stuff, but I learned about how that there's physically a courage aspect of your brain, just like we have the alligator amygdala part of the brain, and that you can rewire that. And anyway, very interesting stuff. You guys are going to be so entertained and so educated and inspired by this conversation. Patrick Sweeney. All right, check it out, nextlevelmethod.com. You can look at all of our past guests, subscribe to on your favorite podcast application. Again, go to the website, learn what we're coming up in 2022, all the live events that we got coming up. And you can learn more. Follow us on your favorite podcast application. Like I said, it does wonders to keep us front and center in this ever-growing sea of podcasts, so your support is widely appreciated. All right, let's get on with this great conversation with Patrick Sweeney, the author of Fear is Fuel, here on Next Level Method. Patrick Sweeney, we're so excited to have you on the show. Welcome, my friend.
It is great to be here. I'm excited to talk to you guys and get to meet your audience as well.
Yeah, God, so many things to start, but fear obviously is huge. Another podcast that I have that always comes up, Matt and I, when we initially met, we talked about fear a lot. I've come to the conclusion that fear and uncertainty just never goes away. I mean, that's kind of like the big lesson that I've always learned, and it's like actually a blessing in disguise, right? It's like I've tried to learn how to kind of embrace fear. I don't know, how do you feel when you hear me say that?
I think you are 100% spot on, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize is how the brain works. And what I want to help understand is that we can reprogram our brain as much as we want, or as little as we want, or as much as we want, because of something called neuroplasticity. And that means we can change literally the structure inside our brain, the connections that we make at any age. So it's not just when we're growing up.
We've had a couple guys on the show talking about neuroplasticity. How do you say it?
Neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity.
And, and so I know Matt and I are firm believers of that too. We believe that. I'd like to believe that. I'd like to think, gosh, I'm hoping not. The way I'm programmed, I can't be changed. Yeah. How did you get?
Richard, since we're pilots, it's easy for us to understand that some things there are certain truths in life, I guess, and gravity being one of them, certainly a big one of them. But uncertainty is as well, and unpredictability. The question is whether or not we get disempowered by that uncertainty, or whether we get excited by it. Those are sort of the two ends of the spectrum. And our brain is a prediction engine. So the way our brain works is we're constantly trying to predict the outcome of every moment, every event. And we oftentimes do it subconsciously. So before you walk into Starbucks, on 90% of the days, your subconscious knows what you're going to order, where you're going to go, and what you're going to do with that cup of coffee when you get it. And all of that is happening before you even consciously make that decision, because it's ingrained in our past history, in this massive hard drive we have that's called our subconscious mind. But when we're not ordering coffee, our subconscious is trying to constantly predict the outcome of every moment. And we do that based on past experiences. So we can either do that with the idea of, hey, this is challenging, this is exciting, this is a really good opportunity, or we can do it with the mindset that I'm under threat, my warning system's going off, this is a moment to be fearful and to just shrink back into my shell and get as safe as I possibly can.
Yeah, and that's the rub, right? How do we get to the part where we're empowered instead of disempowered by it? How do we get excited by it? And that's where I think hearing your origin story would be very important to us, because it's a classic example of somebody who was pretty much overcome by fear, but by kind of choice and the universe kind of put on you, you were kind of forced to either kind of do that choice, right? And so let's hear that. How did you get to that point where you feel you use fear as a motivator, instead of something that kind of cripples you?
So Richard, it was when I almost died, and it took that kind of dramatic event to really get me to the point where I could start to see what was happening in my life and what was really going on around me. Because I grew up, I grew up son of first generation Irish immigrants. My dad was working 3 jobs. No one in my family went to college at all. And so I had this complex growing up of not being good enough in my own mind. And then add on top of that some of my initial fear frontiers. One was seeing a plane crash at 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
At Logan Airport, and seeing it burst into flames on a television as they're reporting it live, and then having an incredible reaction when our family, a month later, a couple of weeks later, was supposed to take our first family trip. Then it was on Delta, and I remember the black and white scene of that Delta airplane crash and the logo on the tail. And when we went into Logan Airport, we were supposed to fly to Atlanta. My Aunt Ginny and Uncle Teddy had a litter of puppies, and we were getting one of them, our first family puppy, and we're all super excited. And we get into the airport, and I saw that tail, looking through the smoky thing, I saw the tail logo of Delta, and immediately my amygdala, the fear center in my brain, took over, and I had this incredible panic attack. I was scratching at my mother's arms, wailing, screaming, so much so that we got kicked out of Logan Airport, and we ended up driving 14 hours down to Atlanta with my old man sitting in front, not saying a word the whole time.
He's just thinking about how much money he put out on those tickets.
And this little
and the
kid,
puppy.
I'm gonna friggin' break him in half.
Right. Oh my god.
So that was my initial fear frontier, and I spent my whole youth growing up, really, and adolescence, trying to cover it up, because where I came from, it was shameful to be afraid, right? If you're afraid, you're a big pussy, and you don't deserve to be hanging out with us. So don't show any fear. And so I was constantly covering that up and trying to be a tough guy and as strong and as macho, and it got into sports and did really well, figuring that would help me find self-esteem, which of course it didn't. It just helped me get fast on the race course. And then went to business school, and I thought I'd make a ton of money, and that would get me self-esteem. So I set a goal in business school. I'm going to make a net worth of $40 million by the time I'm 40 years old. And this is right in the middle of the dot-com heyday, and fuck everything else. All I'm going after is money. And I can get to my wife and my daughter, I can see them later, when I retire, after I've made all this money, and I can talk to my friends at home. And it was all set on that. And I was working 70 hours a week in the office all the time, and my body something, but I didn't know what it was. It just felt really bad. So the way I dealt with it was drinking. So I'd have 6 or 7 beers every night, and, starting at 5 or 6 o'clock in the office with the guys, go to some venture capital event or some networking event, and 5 or 6 more. And then I'd end up, driving blurry-eyed drive home, get home at 1 o'clock in the morning, feel like I had to go sweat it out, that whole Irish Catholic, guilt thing. So wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, go to the gym, sweat it out, and do the same thing over and over again. And what I didn't realize is that feeling was cortisol. So the stress hormone that I didn't know how to shut it off in my body. I didn't know how to turn that spigot off. So it's coursing through my body, eating away at it like acid. And all I was doing was drinking to cover it up. So I had this really toxic lifestyle. And I went into the gym one morning and my arm just started to hurt. And I thought, well, that's really strange. I must have pulled a muscle or, strained a tendon or something. That's all right. I'll go do cardio, and hopped over on the cardio machine. And next day woke up and my arm was really red, like a Christmas tree, really sore. And I could barely move the fingers. And I thought, man, I should really go to a doctor. And of course I didn't, right? Because I was too scared.
Yeah, you're tough.
Right.
I was afraid of what he was going to tell me.
Right.
And on the third day, I woke up and I could barely wake up. I just felt like shit. I couldn't move. And I said, all right, I got to go to the doctor. And I went to the doctor and he did a blood draw, took my blood, and he looked at it and he said, it looks like a staph infection. And it's pretty common for guys who are in health clubs and, if you use a sauna or a steam room or whatever, he said, it's not uncommon to get a staph infection. Here's some antibiotics, and the nurse will call you back this afternoon with your blood test results. And, I'm sure in 3 or 4 days, you'll be fine. So the nurse didn't call me back. The doctor did. And that's one of those moments, that was a phone call that changed my life. And he said, we don't know what it is, but you don't have any white blood cells. You've got no immune system right now. And we want to check you into the hospital right now and start to do tests on you. And they did, and started to do tests. And they said, we have no idea what this is. We're going to bring you up to Hopkins, which is the best hospital in the world and the best specialists. And so 24 hours later, I was up at Hopkins, and the doc comes in and he says, we looked at the tests and we've in the world here and the best technology, but I got to tell you, it looks pretty advanced. And so my 1-year-old daughter's at her grandparents' house. My wife's sitting down at the end of the bed, and this guy says, we really think you should get your affairs in order and think about saying your goodbyes. And my wife's 6 months pregnant. And so she goes into shock when she hears this. And I'm trembling and not even understanding how to process it. But in the midst of getting this news, all I could feel was this tremendous sense of regret. I just felt like I wasted 35 years of what could have been an amazing life, because I was afraid to get on a plane. I was afraid to, ask someone out. I was afraid to do all these things. And I had all these opportunities presented to me. So that was, the moment when I thought, I really need a second chance. And my daughter deserves a dad who's not too big of a chicken to get on a plane and take her to Disney World or take her to Ireland to see her relatives or whatever. And if I get out, then, I'm going to overcome this fear of flying. And that was my first thought.
Wow.
And so so you're told to get your affairs in order. You're told that you don't have, when they say that, I'm assuming they're telling you don't have long to live. Kind of, I guess, obviously you're alive. Thank goodness. So what?
Don't give away.
I gave away the ending. Sorry.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
This podcast brought to you by Johns Hopkins Hospital. So kind of take us from there. What happened from there?
How'd you beat it?
Yeah.
So, well, I'll tell you how I beat it, and I'm 100% convinced. Well, it's three ingredients to how I beat it. Number one, best docs in the world, and they found the guy who discovered my rare form of leukemia in Hershey, Pennsylvania, at the Penn hospital, and brought him down. He's a great, terrific guy. He now runs the cancer center at University of Virginia, Tom Loughran. And so he came down, he was explaining what was going on. They got all these experts in. So that's number one. Number two, I spent 6 years training for the Olympics in rowing, and I was second in the Olympic trials, raced the World Cup for 3 years, and won a bunch of international championships, and really learned a ton of mental training, which is in the book. It's chapter 6. That's probably my favorite chapter in the book, and in the Audible online book, the Audible book. And this guy Shane Murphy, who I interview in the audio version, taught me all this stuff about mental imagery, and it's not what most people think, right? It starts out with sort of the simple, YouTube version of visualization and meditation, and you get your body relaxed and everything else. And so Shane had me a few weeks, during the winter when I go out to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs to do the dryland training. And he started out with all that pretty little stuff. And we were in this giant egg-shaped thing. It's like the size of a Volkswagen Bug, but it's super comfortable and temperature controlled and all these speakers around. And so it enhances the meditative state. And the first couple of times, I didn't know much about visualization or mental training or hypnosis or anything like that. So he gets me in and he gets me all calm, and you sort of start to feel like you're weightless, almost above your body if you're doing it well. And anyone can get this with just meditation or breathing. And so he's getting me there, and he starts to, the second or third day, we start to go through races, and he's like, oh, you're pulling up against the Russian sculler. He looks really strong, and he's pulling away, and you're starting to move on him. The two of you are getting away from the team. Now you're rowing through him, and it's all, it was me winning. And I'm like, wow, that was a great race. Here I am in the Olympics winning this and seeing you win this. And then the second week we started, I'm in this nice relaxed state, and I'm starting to pull away in the race. And then all of a sudden Shane kicks in. He's like, your oar just hit one of the buoys. You ducked down to port and you almost fell into the water. Your boat's filling up with water. The whole course is going by you. And it's like a record scratching in my head. I'm like, Shane, what the fuck is going on? I'm supposed to be winning. And he's like, get back, control. Now let's see how you recover from this situation. So he started to do a lot of, what the Stoics would call premeditation of evil, and start to really think about what are the worst things that could go wrong. And he started talking me through these. And literally that summer, I did the third or fourth World Cup event of the year in Lucerne, Switzerland, the top of Lake Geneva, or north of Lake Geneva. And I got waked by an official's launch. They were going down for the next race, and they threw a wake up, which disturbed me. And the year before, I would have been screaming and mad and red with anger. And this time, I literally laughed when it happened, because I'm like, oh man, Shane talked me through this 50 times,
right.
And so I know exactly what's going to happen and what's going to go on. So that ability to take away the unpredictability, or to be comfortable with that uncertainty, is what made me so fast in a rowing shell. And so I started applying that same concept to healing my body. And I would imagine every waking moment, I'd think of these warrior cells coming out of my sternum and attacking the rogue T cells, these white blood cells that had gone rogue and that were leukemia cells. And I just imagined playing Call of Duty inside my body at the cellular level, and seeing these warrior cells exploding the leukemia cells. And so between the docs at Hopkins, that visualization, and then, a buddy of mine owns an Irish bar in Arlington, Virginia, and I met a priest one night, who was sneakily undercover without his collar on, and we ended up hitting it off. And Father Joe, and so when I got sick, Father Joe said, "Don't worry, I'll put in an extra word for you."
For the big guy upstairs.
Between the three of them, it was the combination that got me out of the hospital.
That's awesome.
And so you recovered. How long was that process?
So it was a few months, and then I had to go home and basically be boy in the bubble, right? While my immune system built back up, I couldn't go out. I couldn't have friends over. So it was just my daughter, my pregnant wife, and myself, basically, and my dog, Ada. And she was a big old Newfoundland, like the one kicking around here. And so I had to stay like that. But during that time, I got to go out and experience the outdoors, which gave me so much joy and love and happiness, just to be outside and see the leaves again, see the trees, see the mountains. And we had horses, so I went horseback riding, and I could do anything outside. I just couldn't be with other people where there's a lot of potential germs. And so that was such a great period for me. And it was also when I set up my future life. So I made a list of 100 things I was going to do before I die. I decided how I was going to get over this fear of flying. And as soon as I got the clean bill of health from my doctor, I was going to go start flying lessons. And if I kicked and screamed and cried at every single lesson, I was going to get my private pilot's license. And so that was my next order of business.
And you became, I mean, I'm jumping ahead, but I mean, okay, that's great. That's a great story, and we could make a movie out of that. Mm-hmm. But then you become an aerobatic pilot, right? Or an acrobatic pilot?
Yeah, you know insane. What the thing was, Richard, the first two planes, so you know when you've been in a car accident and the car spins around or you see another car coming at you and everything moves in slow motion? There's a neuroscience reason for that, right? When you're scared and your fear center, your early warning center explodes, that's called the amygdala, and that gives you an amygdala hijacking. It stops everything unnecessary, but it brings extra blood into your brain. It dilates your pupils. It makes your senses and your muscles respond quicker. It produces this fear cocktail that gives you super high performance. So you're taking in all this detail in HD when you're in a car accident. Man, I was like that walking out for the first lesson. I probably peed 4 times before we even got out to the plane, right?
Right.
But I remember all the colors and the sounds and the temperature and the feeling, and I was terrified. And then the second lesson, we're in a little Diamond DA40, little 4-seater, and we go over the Blue Ridge Mountains and we hit some turbulence, and that's when I think I pooped myself, a tiny bit. But the bizarre thing was, after maybe the 8th or 9th flight, I just fell in love with flying. And you know, that's why I say when I give a lot of my talks, all your dreams are on the other side of fear.
Yep.
And once I got past that fear, I realized, man, this is the most fulfilling, rewarding thing I've ever done. And I wanted to learn more about it. So I got my instrument rating. I got my commercial rating. I got the seaplane rating, which was wicked fun. And then I started doing aerobatics because I would have, just talking about aerobatics, I mean, I literally would have had a fundamental body change 15 years ago or 16 years ago. And now, you know, being able to defy the thing that most terrorized me, if you would have said to me, imagine yourself upside down, rocketing towards the earth in a spin, pulling 5 Gs, you know, it would have been the nightmare that you could possibly, the most horrid thing I could think of. And now it's the most fun and challenging and exciting thing I can think of.
Flying, you got the flying bug in you, which I totally get. Once it gets in you, it never leaves you. And so I understand that completely. But then you realizing that doing aerobatics was what? What was that about aerobatics that led you to even be a competitor in it?
You know, I think it was a theme, Richard, that came out in my life post leukemia, and that was continual challenge and continual improvement. You know, I've always thought of, you always try and get better, and I still do. Like I think my passion now is rock climbing, and I think the toughest grades I'll climb will be in my 50s or 60s, and you know, because I think you can continually get better. And so for me, it was probably the fact that it was something so foreign and so terrifying, and something that, you know, I would have, even just to talk about, I would have been uncomfortable, and physically probably reacting to a conversation about people talking about it, and would have, you know, had to leave the room or something to that effect. And to be able to control it and feel comfortable. And there's one point in, and you guys know this, there's one point in your private pilot, so at the start of your flying career, where you have to do something called a spin recovery. And it's where the most common accidents happen is with, well, first of all, with a stall recovery. And then if you've got an adventurous instructor, you can do a spin recovery. And even doing this stall recovery, where you basically fly up as steep as you can, until the engine can't power you anymore and the wings don't provide any more lift, and you basically slip off the edge of a table like a glass about to break on the ground. And that's that's the analogy that absolutely came to mind the first time I did it. And I think I'm screaming like, a little girl or Tarzan or something like that when the instructor shows the first, shows the example of the first one before he says, now you try it. I actually think he might have said, well, maybe now's not the day for you to try it. was sort of the first response. But then, it's one of those things that after you get comfortable in the plane, you think, well, what's next? And for me, it was learning more about navigation and being able to fly, twin engines or bigger size planes or things that go with a commercial license, and then landing on the water and a seaplane. And so at some point it became being in the worst possible place you could have imagined just 15 years ago and controlling it or coming out of it with the feeling that you can deal with everything that you're sensing or feeling. And so it's just, I think it's that continuing to try and see where the limit is now.
I love that. And that's the point, I think, with everybody listening to this, and the fascinating story, but the key takeaway, I think, is that something significant is always on the other side of that fear. That's why fear is a blessing. Yeah. I like to look at it as a blessing. There's something significant on the other side. If you work through it, you're going to be rewarded. I mean, that's my big takeaway from this story.
And Richard, I have seen zero exceptions to that.
Me too.
So I've seen that hold true with absolutely everybody. And if you can get to it's super uncomfortable and really hard to get to the other side of that fear, but there is always a gift in there.
Always.
There is always an incredible lesson to learn. There's always a blessing.
Yeah, the comfort zone and the growth zone don't exist in the same plane. They can't. And so that's the beauty of it, and that's if you can embrace it. Hearing you talk about, of course, I can geek out on the aviation side, but again, I think that's everything that any modicum of success that I've had up to this point in every venture that I've done, from personal relationships to my businesses to my partnerships, all of that goes back to the skills that I learned in aviation and going through those fears and going through all that training, right? And having great instructors that took me. The worst instructors were the ones that you could see in your periphery vision. Their hands were like on the, they were about to take it from you. And I was
fidgety,
right. And I was an instructor. Was in the military. I taught in T-37s in training, so I taught all this stuff too, spins and aerobatics and all that stuff. And even though I made it a point to just sit there and act like I could care less that this kid was about to kill me, right? I made them, right? But I sat there prepared, but I wanted them to, because I had great instructors. My point of this is that took me to that edge, right? That almost let me land with the gear up. That almost let me do an approach, turn, stall on the final, right? And they sat there and they took it from me at the last minute. Like, dude, you are this close to killing yourself, right? I mean, that was the biggest lesson, but I mean, it was a big confidence booster, and it was like, okay, I'm never going to do that again, right? But that's the point, is that you've got to, and I guess I was never really afraid. I mean, of course, seemed like I was always afraid of flying, but I was afraid of the instructors. I was afraid of failing. I wasn't afraid of the flying piece. So I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes. Like, God, to be like afraid of flying and then do this is amazing to me. I mean, I just can't even. And I didn't like aerobatics. I was telling them when we were having the technical difficulties, like I would teach aerobatics, and I was like, yeah, that looks like a loop. Let's just get this over with, because I always got motion sick watching somebody else do aerobatics. When I'm doing it, I'm fine, but I'm watching somebody else, I'm like, I'm about to puke. Yeah. And that's not cool to puke in front of your students. So.
No. Especially some, I mean, you're a Marine.
Yeah, I was in the Marine. Sure. Here's some Air Force guy.
You're spraying the waterproof on the inside of your shirt so the sweat doesn't show through.
Exactly right.
So you go through this. At what point do you write this book, Fear is Fuel? What point does that happen?
There's a great story. A lot of people don't hear that story, Matt. But again, when you have courage in your life, when you've got this mindset that everything's a blessing and that you're there to learn. And the way you get that is exercising those neural connections.
Right.
It's like a muscle in your mind. If you exercise that muscle every day, it's going to get stronger. And we've got a courage center and we have a fear center. And we can exercise those synaptic connections where we take impulses and where we connect to. And the neurons that fire together will wire together. It's like beating a path down in the snow. So if we practice being courageous every day, it becomes that much easier. So all these opportunities start to open, right? Like my kids think I'm the luckiest guy in the world. And I just say, the world is a very friendly place and things are just going to happen in your service. And they always do to me. My kids see it and they're like, holy shit, Dad, how did that just happen? did that guy just buy us the penthouse suite up here for the weekend because, you helped whatever, give him some advice on cryptocurrency? And I'm like, yeah, he did. So I say that because I think all those things happen for a reason. And this is the same thing. I was doing a 100-mile charity bike ride, maybe, this is now 5 or 6 years after leukemia. I was recovered, back to, living life. But now I was doing a lot more outdoor stuff and realizing that I was really happy in the outdoors. And so I'm on this 100-mile bike ride in Boston for Mother's Day charity. And after about 20 miles, you get into the same pace with a group of people. One of the guys next to me is this neuroscientist from Tufts University. And we start talking. I'm like, I've always been fascinated by neuroscience because I went from being, the friggin' Diary of a Wimpy Kid to Captain Courageous in the course of like a year. And I said, and then my whole life changed because I had this halo effect of courage. And I said, how in God's name can that happen? That one mind changes so dramatically over the course of, call it 12 months. And he said, well, you know what? You ought to come into our lab and see. So, a week later, I go into his lab. He explains everything about the amygdala, what happens in your brain, the primitive part of our brain versus the newer part. And I'm fascinated by this. And he said, you should really go see this guy, Scott Orr, over at Harvard University. He's an expert in PTSD and working with a lot of former military. So I went and saw Scott and had coffee with him. And I said it was at this point where I said, how come I've never heard of any of this shit before? And Scott said, we put it in medical journals in using really complex jargon. And he said, there's no way that, your average software engineer or school teacher is going to understand or read about any of our research. And I said, it's really a shame because number one, it's super interesting. And if I had known this about how the brain works, it would have changed how I behaved. And number two, it can really help a lot of people. So that started me off interviewing 35 of the world's top neuroscientists and 6 years of research to get to the book. And that's what led to the book, because I wanted to tell people that we can most definitely reprogram our brain. And in fact, the thing I learned from both rowing, at the world-class level and from flying is when you get to a certain point of fear, when you get to a certain point of anxiety, you can have way better performance than at any other time in your life, is when you have that fear response, but you've done just what you were saying, Richard, and they taught, in Marine Corps flight school, is basically compartmentalize that fear, but still go ahead and act with it. And now you're stronger, you're smarter, your senses are really on edge. And so that to me was an important book and a story that needed to be told.
I love that. That's very intriguing to me because I always talk about everything you're talking about, but I didn't have the science chart. I never thought about connecting the courage part to the amygdala. I've always talked about the alligator, the lizard brain, but I didn't really know that you could. That's interesting that you've kind of parsed it down. I'm fascinated by that because it's that there's science behind it.
You know what, Richard, Matt's heard the story about the Courage Center. He might not have remembered it, but it's one of the best stories in the book. So if you want, I'll share it now.
Yeah, please.
Go ahead.
Yes.
So there's tons of research. If you look up fear on the on any of the research or academic journals and that sort of thing, there's thousands and thousands of pages in research study. There's very little on courage, and excuse me. The best study on courage that I've ever seen is by an Israeli neuroscientist named Yadin Dudai, University of Israel. And what this guy did was, and this was 2017, he put a sign up on campus and he said, looking for people who are afraid of snakes. and so if you had a fear of snakes,
that's me.
Call this number, or show up at his lab. And so he recruited 100 people who, by self-separation said they were afraid of snakes and they had a fear of snakes. They had to take a study, take a survey, and then he, out of whatever 100 people, he got 50 people that passed his criteria to be part of this experiment. And so he put all these guys on a functional MRI machine, which is basically like a big coffin. If you've never seen an MRI machine, but it's round, hollow, and you slide into the middle of it. It makes this terrible noise, and the functional ones are showing what your brain does in real time. And so he's got you lying in this fMRI, and then maybe 10 feet beyond your head on a set of railroad tracks that leads right to your head is a wagon with a snake inside of it.
Oh my God.
And he gives you a little remote control. And he says the green button presses it closer to you and it brings the cart closer to you. The red button gets it away and it sends it in the other direction. And he said, we're putting the snake in the cart now. He looks fine. He's not agitated. I want you to bring that cart as close to your head as you possibly can. And so what you can imagine happened is 80% of the people were, basically like, F this, I'm hitting the red button, I'm getting this thing away from my noggin, and I'm getting out, I'm collecting my $20 and I'm getting out of here. And so when they did that, their amygdala lit up. And it was like a Christmas tree, right? Big, bright, fear center, emotional response. And what happened I can't remember what he said, what the numbers were exactly. It's in the book, but 20% of the people, for instance, gave him the instructions, gave him the remote control, the amygdala lights up, and then something incredible happened. They were able to shut down the amygdala and light up this area called the SGACC, the subgenial anterior cingulate cortex. That's our courage center. But the amazing thing was he sat and he watched one area that was lighting up with electrical impulses literally shut down, like someone pulled the plug on it, and the other one light up.
Interesting.
And so these people were clearly afraid of the snake when they got there. They were, they got in because they were afraid of snakes. They had an amygdala. They had a fear response when they found out there was a snake at the top of their head and they could actually see it in a mirror or something above their head. And yet still, by choice, they were able to override that fear center and activate the courage center. And that to me says almost everything you need to know about courage. And there was a further study by Abigail Marsh at Georgetown University. And she put mice in these situations where they got electrocuted. And so they learned stimulus and response. They learned if they got near this particular pad, they'd get electrocuted. So they'd stay away from that pad until they took the offspring. They took the mama mouse's little baby mice and put them on the other side of that pad. So the mama mouse knew that she was going to have to suffer this pain, and she had a fear of that pad, but she still went through it for their offspring. So the moral of the story is, if you have an altruistic motivation, if you're doing something for other people, it makes it even easier to activate that courage center. And so finding out about that we have a courage center, that we can reprogram it. Sometimes you have to cheat it by saying, I'm going to pretend my daughter's burning in this building and go out and give this speech because the speech will shut off the flames, and that's I'm going to use to be strong and courageous, or silly things like that you can learn to use. But the fact of the matter is, the more often you activate that courage center, the easier it is to turn it on.
That's very interesting to me. I mean, I've always said courage is a choice, right? When I've coached and I've done speeches about courage, it's a choice. But knowing that kind of biological geekdom kind of helps out. It just reinforces or validates what we kind of or intuitively, instinctively, or know through anecdotal experience, right? That that's really fascinating to me.
And Richard, the thing about the neuroscience, and this is why I wrote the book the way I did, it's unarguable.
Yeah.
Right? This is data driven. You can look and watch on an MRI. You can test people's enzymes. It's all data driven stuff. And so when someone says, no, I can't do that, the answer is, yeah, you could. You have the same biology as me and him and him and him. You could do this. It's just that you choose not to, or you don't have the right tools to. And so, I'm very empathetic to people like that, but I think the science-based approach is a great way to say, yeah, you can do it.
Yeah, and the fact that too, I love the altruistic motive or the motive bigger than yourself. I mean, you see that when people have done just these amazing, courageous things, right? Of course, there's always something there, like the guy next to me. I don't want him to die, or my kids, or
here's my amazing uncourageous story around that. I was at a horse whisperer once. And the whole goal was to basically be present, and you had to walk over and you had to lift the back leg of the horse up like you were going to shoe it, right? And so I went over and I would try, and the horse whisperer just was letting me do it, right? He was just standing there. Wyatt Webb's the guy's name. He's down in Tucson, Arizona. And so he's just standing there. And so I'm trying to lean in. He's like, you think you're going to be able to push that 1,000-pound animal? Go for it. And so I'm doing all this stuff. And I can't get the horse to budge, right? And so there's a couple ladies there, a mother and a daughter. And so the mother goes over and tries to lift the hoof. And she can't get to lift either. And he just looks at me right in the eye, just steely-eyed. And he said, walk over there and lift that horse's leg for that lady, please. And I just walked over there and I just lifted that leg. That horse just gave me that leg, and just like that. He said, so does this show up in your life that you'll do more for others than you'll do for yourself? And I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy. So it kind of comes down to that.
It really does.
I think you probably become more present. You become more centered when you are in service of others than when you're, I think we question the ability, should I be doing this for myself, or am I selfish, or am I greedy, or whatever comes up, right? Or whatever the monkey mind says. But ultimately, we're in the service of others. We can override those things, those thoughts in our head, right?
Absolutely. I'm just thinking of all these amazing stories of courage that just seem impossible. And it's because there was some other thing of service to others, or I'm not going to let this happen.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. Hero stories, right? I mean, whether it's, you guys are talking about pilots, Sully landing that plane on the river and stuff like that, right? There's something that kicks in that's like, I'm going to do this because it's.
Well, that one's kind of cut and dry. It's like, I'm either going to live or I'm going to die. So I'm just going to keep on doing this until I either, become a smoking hole in the ground, or I walk away a hero, right?
Right. So what did you do so you wrote the book, and then I met you a little over a month ago giving a talk here in Wichita, a live talk, and you actually had us up rappelling off. If you're scared of heights, go over here and rappel off this 3-story structure. And if you're scared of spiders, go over here with the spiders and let a spider crawl. You kind of had like a fear factor thing going on there, where it was like, whatever you're most afraid of, let's go do that right now. You should have given people the opportunity to public speak, I guess, or something. I hear that's the top one
fear, right?
The number one
public
fear.
Speaking.
But so you visit with people. You've got the book. I'm assuming you come on podcasts and stuff. As you're just finding ways to help people understand it on a more not granular level, but realistic level, where they
practical.
Practical level, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you got to experience it too, Matt. So you understand why I try and scare people. And if I'm doing a keynote, I did the keynote last year for 4,000 people at this franchise conference, and I don't have the opportunity to do the one-on-one stuff we did, jumping off a side of a building or grabbing a boa constrictor or something. Then what I'll do is I'll say, turn up the lights. And normally this is where I'd ask for volunteers, because I want to pay tribute to all the veterans in America. We're going to sing the national anthem. I'd normally ask for volunteers who can come up and sing with me, but oh boy, we're a little short of time. So I'm just going to pick some people to come up on stage.
Beautiful.
And you immediately,
I got to go to the bathroom right now. People are heading out the side door.
That's it. And I immediately know who I'm going to pick. And I'm always looking down. You in the blue sweater, just because you're not looking at me doesn't mean I can't see you.
Yeah.
And so what I do then is I'll tell people, how do you feel right now? If you're one of those people, where do you feel in your body? And really try and get them to hone in on the body sensations of where you're storing fear and where you're sensing fear. Because then when it happens in your relationship, in your workday, with your company, with your kids, the following week, you start to feel it. You say, okay, well, that's the amygdala talking there. I'm going to take a couple of deep breaths. I'm going to do, a few 4x4s maybe. I'm going to step back and assess the situation. And so the practical events are to try and get you to feel those sensations and feel when fear manifests itself. So then you just start to recognize that, okay, this could be an amygdala response. I'm going to take a step back and make a better decision.
I love that, because that was one of the points I was going to bring up, because a lot of times when we talk about courage and fear, we think about these larger than life things, flying planes, scaling up off of a building, sitting in a bed of tarantulas or whatever, or snakes. But it's the everyday thing of like recognizing it, right? Because courage and fear can manifest itself in the simplest of things. And it's personal, right? If I've never stood up and at the family table on Thanksgiving, I've never said grace, and maybe it's important to me. I'm like, I'm going to, but it just petrifies me. It's the same feeling that Sully Sullenberger had trying to land on the Hudson, right? It's the exact same physical manifestation. And I think, to your point, if you can get people to recognize those, Patrick, it shows up all the time. And that's what's exciting, is like every little moment, there are all these little moments where we can overcome fear with courage, right? Everyday little moments, right?
And the way, the first step in doing that is recognizing that you've got to practice these things, and that there's science behind it. So one of the best things I ever told my kids, and if you're a parent, this is I 100% urge you to make sure you tell your kids the same thing, because neurobiologically, the way that we're designed as humans is not to inbreed. So literally there's 50% of the population that's going to like us and 50% that won't, just based on neurobiology. Now you can tip those in other scales by being a nice person, being non-threatening or whatever. But literally it's about 50-50. And that's why every friggin' presidential race for the past 200 years in our country has been 48% to 51 or 52 to 49 or something like that, where it's, but it wouldn't be 52 to 49, but 52 to 48. But
depends on which election.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. How many charts were floating?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry about that.
So, but the point is, I told my kids, and my daughter still contends. She's at her first year of college this year, and she still contends it was the best advice I ever gave her. Was that 50% of the people you meet are going to like you, 50 aren't. So spend your time and effort concentrated on those 50 that are going to be your group, your tribe, your people. And don't sweat trying to make everyone in school trying to like you. And it's the same thing, Richard, you were saying when we started, is that if people just knew that we could turn on the courage center and turn off the fear center, well, we can. So if we know these things, then we can start to get curious. And the biggest thing I try to leave audiences with, especially when I'm with Matt's group, like YPO, which I've been a member of for 12 years, is that as leaders, if we want to be great leaders, we have to replace judgment with curiosity.
Yeah, I love that.
Because judgment is the biggest animal inside our fear center, right? Judgment is just what eats up everything in there, and it's got the biggest appetite. So if we can replace that judgment with curiosity and get used to catching ourselves judging, right? Like get used to walking into a Starbucks and seeing some dude who looks like he's the victim of some drive-by piercing and thinking, man, what a freak show. Look at that guy.
He fell into a tackle
Instead
box.
saying, okay, yeah, when diving in the tackle box. So instead of doing that, saying, okay, what can I appreciate about that guy? Number one, he must have one massive threshold for pain, because I could never do that shit in my upper eye and that sensitive area. Number two, he doesn't care what anyone thinks about him, right? He's an individual. He's doing something that he wants, and yeah, that's great. And so when you do that, when you stop and you catch yourself judging, and then you try and figure out, you try and be curious, you have an entirely different interaction with that kid. Right? You go up to him with a total different posture, with a total different mindset. And next time you come in, you've planted that. So you've already taken care of what I call your future past. Yeah. Right. Because your subconscious is all driven by past.
Right.
So if you make that change and you think about how you feel, and that entry that's going to go into your subconscious as part of your past is a lot different than a judgmental entry that you put in there. So now you're going to come back to Starbucks, and he's going to be your man. Say, man, I want to go up to him, and I want to go up to Ichabod and get my coffee from him.
Right.
I love that, man.
Today's podcast has been brought to you by Starbucks.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you getting paid by Starbucks? Did we not know this? The Starbucks is sponsoring you, aren't they?
I'm telling my producer Troy back there. You can't see him.
They can pay me in crypto.
There we go.
Right.
There we go. I love it.
Making a note for our producer Troy. We got these little sound effects buttons on it. We never utilize.
We have sound effects?
Yeah, I want to.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Can we get an amen? I want a Southern Baptist preacher.
Say amen.
Can I get an amen?
Can I get?
And I want to put that because you said a couple things. I would have signaled you, Troy, and you would have been. Can I get an amen?
Giving me an amen on that.
Yeah, but the replacing the judgment with the curiosity, right?
Yeah.
I think that is so.
Amen.
Key. Amen.
Yeah, amen.
Right.
Yeah.
That was so awesome, dude. I mean, that to me. I'm this thing in these conversations I'm trying to have with my kids when they're having these conversations about, well, this person doesn't like me, this or that. And I'm like, just get curious about these other people, right? And everybody's got their story. This, you can see it because we've all lived through it. We've all lived through high school. We've all lived through the drama. We've already seen it. We've got the wisdom and the marination of life on us. But I was trying to tell her that what you just said about in that succinct words about replacing judgment with curiosity is she's coming at you. She's saying these things. It's never coming from a place of abundance. It's coming from a place of lack and scarcity. So get curious about her, right? Get curious about this person and why would they do that? Try to put yourself in her shoes and why she thinks you're this way or that. And just try to look at it with empathy.
90% of the empathy is key, and 90% of that anger and that. The feeling or the communication that's coming across is because of fear.
Absolutely,
right? That 100%. Person, she's afraid of something.
100%. That's what I told them. It's they're afraid of something, right? That fear is causing that dysfunctional behavior. That's helped even with my executive coaching. I've gone in and I see this kind of the CEO, he's just a hothead, and I'm like, he's a hothead because he doesn't know how to, he's afraid of something, right? He's afraid of, I go, when I was doing this, I remember saying, he's okay, yeah, I can understand why. I said, he's got 300 lives that are on the stake, because this business is at stake. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about, what's going on in his personal life? I mean, when
he's got supply chain issues, and is afraid he's not going to get his order, or might lose his biggest client. He's got all the payroll. Yeah.
And I said that, and I said, I'm going to give him a break if he kicks the refrigerator. I'm going to give him a pass. It's not ideal that he did it, but when we try to understand why someone, you can approach it with empathy and love, as opposed to this kind of ooh, You try to understand what someone else is going through. Anyway, I love this stuff. Yeah,
you're doing amazing work, Patrick. What are you up to now? What's on your mind? We kind of talked a little bit pre-show, but you've actually got something you're trying to do, kind of to, I guess, in a way, benefit the world. So what are you up to?
Yeah, so it's the big moonshot approach. You were wondering why I was in Chamonix. I have a house here and try and spend as much time as I can in Chamonix. I live in Boston, but spend a lot of time here because it's the most beautiful place in the world. And after I sold my last company, I was fortunate to build a really good company and add a lot of value. So we did well, and I could continue my sort of climbing, biking, lecturing, writing, fun lifestyle, which has been incredible for the past 5 years or so. But I actually started investing in cryptocurrencies 3 years ago and was super intrigued by the whole Web 3.0 revolution and completely saw the potential. And I started mining at the beginning of the year, trying to figure out how this works, because the first half of my career was all in data centers. So I built, led the East Coast Center of Excellence for the biggest real estate company, and we built over 6 million square feet of data center space. And then I realized nobody was innovating in this data center space, so I started what became the first cloud hosting company called ServerVault, and it just took off and did really well. And we all know where the cloud revolution is now with Amazon Web Services and Azure. And so that was the precursor to all those. And The really successful company was in the RFID, radio frequency identification space, and doing a lot of stuff there for huge clients like Mayo Clinic and Johnson & Johnson, Vail Resorts, Airbus. We had tons of great clients, and it went really well. And when I saw the impact that mining was having on the environment, so in here in Chamonix, I look up in these incredible glaciers, and I just have, this tremendous love for the mountains and being out here. And I just see them getting smaller and smaller every year. And I mean, it literally breaks my heart to see the glaciers melting, the permafrost going away. I rode a bike across Alaska in February a few years ago, and could even see the changes then. And so I realized this is probably the biggest technological change in our generation. It'll have a bigger impact on the world than the internet. And then I realized it's killing the environment the way that we're doing it now with fossil fuels and taking this brute force approach of a device that's meant to be one at a time and stacking up thousands of them in this big concrete, warehouse, and trying to cool it and creating more heat by the cooling mechanisms and chasing these diminishing returns. It's just, a complete allegory for what we've done through the whole industrial revolution and killing the environment. So I said, I can do something about that. I can fix it. And so I created this company called Green Stake Hosting with the idea that we're going to do crypto mining on a level of efficiency and industrial scale that's never been done before. Oh. That's going to eliminate 65% of the electronic waste. So get rid of all these cooling fans, get rid of all these heat sinks, get rid of all these cases, submerge everything in nice clean dielectric fluids. So basically, mineral oil or canola oil, and reduce the cooling burden, increase the efficiency, and then make them portable enough so you don't have to build a whole data center. You can just basically roll them up like a generator and put them right on the point of renewable energy, like solar farms or wind farms or geothermal or something like that. So it's saving the planet by mining crypto, which is counterintuitive to a lot of people, but that's what makes it a moonshot idea.
That's really cool. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah, people don't realize how much electricity that does take for all that mining of the cryptocurrencies. I mean, you look at some of these, I don't know what you call them, these farms that these guys have, and they're just massive and just chewing up tons of electricity. Like these warehouses full of these processors, and they're paying, these ridiculous amount of electricity fee. It's just eating up tons of electricity,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it doesn't have to be that way, right?
That's cool.
They're just doing it that way because it's hugely profitable. I mean, it's easy to make
it's easy,
millions of dollars.
That's right. It's easy to buy those and just stack them up and turn it on and go and start mining away.
That's it.
Patrick, this is an amazing conversation. Yes. How can people learn more about you? Obviously, the book is Fear is Fuel. You can get that anywhere. But how can people connect with you directly?
Well, the easiest way is probably Instagram. I'm the Fear Guru on Instagram, and LinkedIn is also the Fear Guru or Patrick Sweeney, and those are probably the easiest ways. On Twitter, I'm PJ Sweeney, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm leaving out. The website is pjsweeney.com, and there's links to, I've got a parenting masterclass there. Actually, what I have is really cool that you should share with your listeners is I have a 6-minute fear test. So you can go and take it, and it'll categorize your level of courage in 6 different categories, and then give you you can get a 30-day challenge for increasing your courage, which is pretty nifty, all on an electronic book. So nice. Kind of fun stuff. Go to Test Your Fear. I think it's patricksweeney.com. Test Your Fear.
Very cool. Yeah, very cool.
Patrick, thanks for coming on the show, man. We really appreciate it. Did we talk about? I know we're running short on time here because we got another one we got to do. But did we talk about everything that we wanted to talk about?
I think we could talk for the rest of the day, but I think we should do it in France. Because what I heard most of out of all this conversation is we got an invite to go to France.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I heard.
Absolutely, you guys.
There's a couch back there that 100%. I know I could sleep on. I could sleep right on that couch underneath the Fearless.
You can sleep on the couch. I'll sleep on sleeping bags. Hell yeah.
That big dog looks comfortable. I'll just roll that thing out like a sleeping bag. Yeah. Good pillow there.
That is Snoop Dogg. And so Snoop Dogg does what we call the gangster lean. He just gets up next to you
and does the lean on you.
in.
I love that.
Gets his gangster lean on.
I love it.
But the only other thing, Matt,
Yeah.
that we didn't mention, but I want to say, because I think it's important. You said you interview a ton of successful people, and and everyone thinks their life is just a rocket ship, and
Right.
is nothing but roses and
Rainbows
champagne
and unicorns.
Unicorns and farting rainbows and that whole image. Yeah, exactly. So, but I think, I mentioned COVID was especially tough on my wife, now my ex-wife. And she had a bunch of personal challenges, and we ended up separating, over a year ago, and have been struggling with the challenges and this is after a 20-year marriage where we were both, always faithful and loyal and everything else to each other. To have the marriage, come to an end and completely have to relook at our future was really scary for both of us. And really, it's been a tough 18 months or so. But we've both ended up coming through it better people. Where we went for a hike today together with the dogs, and we see each other a couple of times a week, and we've got a great relationship. But I bring that up just because I think you said it well when we were talking pre-show, that so many people think when you're successful, you've got your life's just perfect. And I got to tell you, the COVID year was probably my worst year ever because of that. Even though I had these incredible highs of the company starting, my daughter getting into this great university, our boys doing great in hockey in school, and then the downside, it's just up and down that you can't predict. And everyone, when you have that, you just have to realize everyone has them, and look for the gift in what we're given. So that's the thing. I hope if anyone got anything out of this the talk today, it's to find the gift in everything you've got, and then replace that judgment with curiosity if you're still judging another person or yourself or a situation.
No.
This was where I would have gone, can I get an amen? So, but I don't have the sound effect.
Where the hell are those sound effects, Richard?
I know, right?
We're going to have to get this progress. Well, and I thank you for your transparency and
we
courage
appreciate
to lean in, because I agree 100%. There's not a destination that at some point you arrive and you get to step off onto the beach and drink pina coladas all day and lay in the lounge chair and just everything's going to be perfect, right? I mean, that's not what this life is built to do. This life is built to give us areas for growth. And if we're not growing, we're contracting, right? Which is getting closer to some type of death, either physical or otherwise. So, it's And every time we have somebody on the show, I'm just amazed at their path and the courage that it took for them to overcome their own sense of fear, whatever that may be in their life, real or perceived. They overcame fear. And so, for you to come on the show today and just kind of talk about the science behind it, but then also the fact that this is a living, working model. This isn't something that I think you've probably mastered the ability to lean into courage, but it is not that the fear is gone. Is that accurate to say?
Oh no, man, no. Everyone asks me if I still have fears. Hell yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It never goes away.
And that's what honestly makes me so proud of myself, right? It takes a long time when you come from a blue collar Boston Irish neighborhood. You're not taught a lot of self-love growing up, and so it takes a while to learn that. But tragically, I lost one of my alpine mountaineering partners in an avalanche at the beginning of the year, and I'm right here at the base of Mont Blanc, and he was killed up there, and it was super tragic, and we were all struck by it back in May, and in September I did a solo of Mont Blanc, which is it's dangerous, but. And I thought about whether I should do it or whether not, but I kind of dedicated it to him. And then, I was up on the summit of Mont Blanc all by myself and just thinking about it. I thought, wow, man, I'm really proud of myself, and I overcame that fear, and that's always there, and I think that can be there with your listeners as well when they, when they feel the fear and they do it anyways, and then they feel the pride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the authentic pride, which is so good. You know, that's the good part of the pride that people don't. We try to avoid pride, but the authentic pride actually produces great things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Patrick, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a great,
amazing conversation. We look forward to staying in touch with you.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me involved, and I'll look forward to hearing from some of your listeners in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Next Level Method podcast. If you found some value in this, tell somebody about the show. Tell your friends, tell your spouse, tell your kids, let them know all about Next Level Method. And go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more and join our community. Thanks for tuning in.